So today we are going to be building an STI suspension, and that is from ISC. We are going to be putting it on David's Black STI. This thing is awesome. In one of the previous videos, you saw us install an AOS and a downpipe on it for stage 2. I believe we did the intake as well. And that car is running beautifully. And now it's time to really step it up and do some suspension on this car. So I'm going to put it on the lift and then we'll get right to it. I'll give you a little cold start on this thing because it sounds so good now that we did the downpipe. He does have a, I want to say it's a Cobb exhaust. I forget what it is. I think it's Cobb. All right, as you can see there, I was wrong. It's actually a Borla exhaust. Regardless, it sounds really good, but he is actually going to be selling that exhaust, I believe, and he's going to be going for something a little bit louder. This is a mufflered exhaust, so it's a little bit more muffled. So let's go ahead, let's get this car in the shop and let's get to work. What we got to do is open the hood so that we can expose the top of the strut tower. And on this car, they are right here and right here. I love the VA chassis because the suspension is very easy to set up and it's placed very conveniently for you to access. So we can see his AOS that we put in there and his MAP intake looks really, really good. So let's go ahead and find out where the coils are. All right, so let's take a look at what he got here. These are the ISC Suspension coilovers, and if you look right here, it says WRX STI N1 V2 coilover suspension triple S spring upgrade, and he has the track and race spring rate. So this is by far the most aggressive suspension setup you can buy from ISC for the STI. I've driven on one of these before and it is phenomenal. So huge shout out to the boys and girls at ISC Suspension, and we know that we have it on Stella. So super cool. I can't wait to see how this STI feels, and I can't wait to get the reaction of the owner of this car. So let's dig into it. That way we can start putting these on. So let's look and see what they look like inside. They're always so intricately wrapped. ISC does a fantastic job at their coilovers. ISC Suspension. That's super cool. All right, look at these coils. Oh my gosh, you can see the gold peeking through. These have to be the nastiest looking coils I think I've ever used. Look at that. And that's that track spring upgrade. So this is what you get when you buy the entire suspension kit. You get a really nice ensemble of accessories. You get the ISC suspension instruction kit, and you get these really cool branded coil tools. So I really like those. And these are gonna be the little Allen keys that I was talking about, which are gonna adjust your damping. I thought it was dampening, but I guess it's damping according to the instructions. You also get your grease and your anti-rust grease. So one thing you might be wondering is, why get a triple S spring? What's the difference? Well, here's what comes with the triple S spring from ISC. Increased stroke, better performance. It's up to 20% lighter than your regular coilover springs. It has high tensile steel, increased ride quality, and using the same spring rate as your other springs, increased spring rate consistency, and reduced roll angle. So very cool. Let's get these going. All right, so there's one step before we start installing them on the car. I don't exactly know if these come preloaded or not. But what I do, regardless of preloading or not preloading, I preload them myself just to make sure that everything is where it should be. Now, there are different ways to preload as far as exact calculations and how much compression the spring needs to be preloaded. I've always used a pretty general rule that's very simple and easy to understand. And if you have any other way that you like to do it, drop it down in the comments. But this is how I like to preload my springs, and usually it's always worked out pretty well for anything that I've installed. So what I do is, I noticed the spring is pretty loose on there, so I don't think it's preloaded. And ISC, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe this is preloaded because it's still kind of loose there. So what I do is I drop this bottom locking collar, and then I start to reverse the collar here. And by reverse, I mean loosen it. That way the spring has some play. And then what I do is I turn this upper collar until it gets the spring about hand tight, where I can't really turn it much anymore. And the spring is pretty, stable. Then what I do is I take this guy, and while holding the threads so that the threads don't turn, I hold the threads and I turn this until I have about... So once this is hand tight, the upper collar and the spring is in place, then what I do is I bring the bottom collar up to meet it, just like this. Then what I do is I take the larger wrench for the bigger collar, and while holding these threads, I turn this clockwise, the upper collar clockwise, and I turn it until there's about, I'm doing this just for video's sake, but you would not touch this bottom ring, but just for video's sake, you would turn this until it gets about this much space away from the top, right where you can fit in this wrench. And that's about where your preload should be. As far as I've ever installed these coils, or any coils for that matter, that's about what I've used for preload, and it always works great. So let me know if that's the same thing that you do, or if you have a different way. Drop it in the comments. But that's how I've always loaded these springs, and loaded any suspension really, and it seems to be working very well for any application that I've been using. So that's how we got to preload those. So these are the rears, and we got to preload that guy, and then we're putting it on the car. All right, step number one, let's get these wheels off, and then what we can do is start looking at the original coil assembly. There's gonna be a couple different steps we have to do to remove the original coils, and then we're also gonna need to compare them to the new coils so that we set a similar height just to get started. Okay, so now we are at the point where we can start removing the original coilovers. Now, you only have to remove three things, really. You have to remove this top bolt, this bottom bolt, and the brake line bolt here. Once you release these three, then the bottom assembly will pretty much be ready to go. Then what you have to do is come up top, and these bolts right here, those are gonna have to be loosened as well. There's three of them, one there, and one on the other side back there. So let me go ahead and do that now, and we'll get this loose. All right, so I got the brake bolt out there, and I got the top one removed. Now all we gotta do is remove the bottom. Sometimes it helps if you put some pressure underneath, lifting it to remove this bolt. So you kind of need two hands to do it. But then what you want to do is, what's going to happen is this entire brake assembly and the rotor is going to want to lean forward towards you. And it's going to drop because you're releasing it from what's holding it up in the air right now. All that it's going to be suspended on is the tie rods and the lower control arm. So what you need to do is gently lower it down so that it's laying towards you, but just go real gentle with it. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'm going to record it. So as you can see, you gently bring it towards yourself, and it's going to want to rotate a little to the side, and that's okay. Just let it hang. Don't drop it, or else you could damage some of your other components. So now we have this just kind of free floating. The other little thing is just this little pop clip that's holding this line in. We're going to just have to remove that from the bracket. Otherwise, the only thing that's holding this in place right now are those three bolts right at the top. So let's go ahead and get that removed. All right, so now you see that the coilover is removed. We have to do something before we install the new coilovers, and we're gonna head over here to where the new ones are to show you what I'm talking about. All right, when we're looking at the coils side by side, you can see we have the new coils and the old ones, and the old ones are a little bit taller than the new ones. So what we have to do is we're going for a stockish height here, and I'll explain why. Even though the end goal is to be lower, what we got to do is we need to extend this down just so it's about the same height as the OEM height. And all you got to do is release this locking collar here and spin this around until it gets to about this height. So we're going to get it as close as we can, and then we'll go back to installing it in the car. All right, so now we have everything adjusted, and if you look, if you line the holes up here, we're very, very close to stock ride height. And this is lined up. You can see I have it just a little bit taller, but we're very, very close. And when you put these two together, they are about the same height. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna lock these bottom collars, we're gonna install it into the car, and we'll go from there. And I'll explain why we're doing stock ride height for right now. All right, so now it's time to install this coil into where it's supposed to go. Now, we know that this coil goes here because we have the brake line right there, and then we have the other little line holder, and so this is gonna go in just like that. So let's go ahead and put it in and see what it looks like. Now, one thing that we have to take a look at is there is a wrong way to install this coil. These can actually be rotated. The head of the coil can be rotated and actually be put in the wrong way. You have to make sure that it's in this orientation so that you can set the camber just like this. That's what these sliders are for. So make sure it's in this orientation. Okay, so let me explain now why we did stock height to start out with. The first reason is when you get this into the proper orientation, to get this piece back up into there, if you start with a very low height, it's nearly impossible to get this up by yourself without a jack. So when we started at this height, it's easy to slide in and bolt in. And also, the other thing is when you install brand new coils that have never been ridden on before, they do have the tendency to start to sink in and break in. And what happens is you set it to a very aggressive height, you will actually start rubbing on your tires as the coil starts to set in. So you want to give it a few hundred miles for it to set in, break in, and then make your final adjustment. So that's what we're starting with right now. All right, and there you go. That is the full assembly of the front ISC suspension coilovers. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave it at this stock height, leave it exactly the same as the other side. We'll drop the car, let it settle, and we'll see how much we need to adjust initially. So do the exact same thing on the other side, and then let's head to the rear. Okay, so now we are on to the rear, and this part is pretty easy as well. So you have 3 bolts here. You have one here, one that connects to the actual coil itself. This goes to the rear sway bar, and this little guy, surprisingly, actually controls your directional headlights. I know that's kind of funky how it's right there, but that's actually what it does. There's a little sensor right there, and it tells you where the headlights need to go. So let's go ahead and remove these 2 bolts here, and then we're gonna remove the sway bar bolt, and then that'll make it very easy to pull this rear control arm down and get this coil out. Now, a little tip that might make it a little easier for you, you actually don't have to remove both of these sway bar bolts. As long as you remove one of the other ones, the sway bar will move together. So all you gotta do is remove one on either side, and then you have full play with this lower control arm. So let's go ahead and pop out the 2 bolts that are holding in this rear coil, and it's ready to come out. And to add And right under this flap is where you're gonna find the 2 bolts. You can see it's a little dark, but they are right there. You got one right where my pinky's at, and then one right up there. So we're gonna remove those, and then the coils will fall right out. And now that we have released the 2 screws, the nuts that are on top of the coil, all you have to do is pull down on this here, and the coil will drop out just like it did there. And you are able to, it's hard to do it with one hand, but basically you just pull this down, and the coil will come out with it, and you can just slide the coil right out. Okay, we have all the bolts back in. The coils are secured to the car. Now what we're gonna do is put the wheels back on, drop the car, and see how it sits. Then what we're gonna do is take the car out, do a little spin around the neighborhood, and see where they kind of settle out. You'll get an initial settlement, and then they will continue to settle the more you drive them for the first few hundred miles, but at least we'll get kind of an initial settle. And then what we'll do is we'll put it back on the lift, adjust it accordingly so that we get some nice fitment, but it's not too aggressive yet. And then it will be all back to the customer. Look at how sick those look. Man, great job, ISC. All right, let's go ahead and get this car ready to roll. Oh, one last thing. Make sure this locking collar is locked. I didn't say that earlier. Just lock it here so that it doesn't turn at all. Just like that. And take the tool and give it just a nice little snug. These do not need to be tight as crap. They need to be just nice and snug. Here's our little tool. Get it here. Nice and snug, little, not even, just boom, boom, right here. Little baby turn, boom, that's it. Nice and snug. Or else, when you go to readjust these, you are gonna have a hell of a time getting them undone. So let's go ahead and put the wheels on and drop the car. And there we go. We got the wheels back on and torqued down. So what we're gonna do is drop the car, see how it settles, take it out for a drive, let it settle a little bit more initially. Then we'll come back and make final adjustments if we need to. And then what we'll do is have the customer drive it for about 500 miles or so. And then we know the coils will reach their full potential of sinkage, if you will. And then we will make the final adjustments to get it nice and close to the body, which is what he wants. So let's bring the car down now. Okay, so we're gonna do an initial drive here. We're gonna be very easy on the car, just doing some turning and things to let the car settle initially. Then we'll bring it back onto the lift and finish the adjustments. So David, the owner of this car, actually just called us and he is super excited to drive the car. I forgot how incredible the transition is. So I actually drove this car before, I drove it around like this before I put it in on the rack, just so I could see what it was like. And what a world of difference. So let's bring it back to the shop and let's make some final adjustments to make it look nice. Dude, it doesn't pull at all. You know how stiff that is?
Yeah.
How does that feel?
I actually kind of like that. Coming from my coils.
Oh man,
so sick.
it's aggressive. Like there is no, like this, the body is just flat. And this thing doesn't even have sway bars yet. When this has sway bars and this ISC suspension, oh my gosh, it's gonna be insane. Around all the corners, it just stays flat. All right, so this is what it looks like resting on the ground there. I think we're safe to come down at least ½ an inch on the rear here, and up front we can come down at least probably 2 inches. I mean, we're monster trucking it right now. So we'll come up about 2 inches and that should be good.
All right, let's see.
You can probably already feel it.
Oh yeah.
Wait till you like give it some good sauce in a turn.
Yeah.
So there's a roadway up to the left that
has a turn on?
It's got turns in it.
That's what living in Florida is like. There's a road over there that has a turn.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that like look, feel that? Isn't that insane? No, that's stock, dude. Oh man, I gotta show you how to heel toe these, bro. I'm gonna show you. you what what
Yeah,
heel toe
let's
feels
go.
like? All right. So let's say we're in fourth. We're coming around.
Yeah.
We're gonna go. Oh my God, dude, the car feels amazing.
You can see the gold right there.
Oh, that's cool.
Woo!
That's awesome.
All right, so if you want to adjust it on the fly, if you go all the way to the left,
Yeah.
that's soft. All the way to the right is hard.
Yeah, you do all the way to the right.
Yeah. So
We're done. We're done right there.
All right, so we also swapped out his fog lights that the previous owner had and gave him some true STI fog deletes there. And now he's gonna get flow to his intake. His intake sits down into the wheel well, so now he's actually gonna get some airflow. Dude came to the Boxer Baddies garage and the whole car changed. All right, have a good one, man. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button. If you subscribe, it lets me know you want to see more content like this. Shoo!